All right. Thank you, Amira, for that introduction. Hello and welcome everyone to our half an hour webinar today. Today, we're just going to share a little bit on how we can start the year strong by thinking about how mental health and well-being can shape company engagement, productivity, as well as values and culture. So, my name is Sarah Zehan. I am a clinical psychologist and head of the mental wellness pillar at Engage Life. So I help companies by curating personalized programs and running their interventions. And we have done talks and workshops around emotional intelligence, communication, setting boundaries. We have done workshops on how to help employees to learn how to regulate their emotions and their stress, as well as even conducting talks on mental health first aid. So, teaching managers and employees at different levels on how to address mental health related issues amongst colleagues and in teams. All right. So, for today, we really want to discuss or share a little bit about what are some of our findings and how some of these findings can help you to be more mindful about the type of wellness programs that we engage in, and what are some of the best practices to help you to really maximize the programs that you run in your company. Okay, so what are we going to kind of cover today? First of all, we're going to touch on how employee mental well-being is linked to things like absenteeism and presenteeism. So we'll share some of our internal data, some of the things that we've collected the past year around how Malaysian employees are doing. Okay, and we'll compare this to data around Southeast Asia as well as other parts of the world to really see global trends and what these things mean about um, trying to get employees to become more engaged and more productive in this day and age. Okay. We will then also talk about how to curate programs based on these information that are really more meaningful and can be more effective, that can tap into not just prevention of mental illness or burnout or stress, but how to tap into the positive aspect of mental health, which is about thriving, resilience, and motivation. Okay. And of course, we know that to really support, to really advocate for well being, it's more than just these one off or quarterly programs, right? But rather, it is about our day to day practices, it's about our habits, it's about policies. Okay. And so we really want to think about what are the things that we need to consider when it comes to shaping mentally healthy workplaces. What kind of cultures and what kind of values do we really want to focus on? So, what do we know from our data? All right. So, based on ratings from Engage Live users in 2025, what we found was that 55% of employees reported moderate to extremely severe levels of anxiety symptoms. So, to be clear, this doesn't necessarily mean that 55% of users have an anxiety disorder, but rather that they reported um, heightened levels of experiencing anxiety. So, for example, they might report having difficulty breathing. They might report being really reactive to situations, catastrophizing or worrying, and being close to panic. Okay. So, this data is consistent with what's being reported in our neighboring countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, where they also found that in recent years, the number of employees who are stressed out and who are burnt out are definitely increasing. Right? This is, of course, in line with everywhere in the United States as well as in the UK. So, if we want to pause for a second to think about what's actually happening here, I think, three quick basic things: uh, global economy and safety, diversity in the workforce, because now we're getting Gen Zs who are also deemed as the anxious generation, right, who are coming into the workforce, um, and perhaps feeling like they may not have adequate skill, especially in terms of managing these cultural divide or cultural differences when it comes to millennials and boomers, because now we have expanded the working age to 60 and even beyond in some countries, right? So when the workforce is that diverse, where there is a lot of difference between um, people in terms of their workplace values and practices, that can sometimes create anxiety on both ends, right? And of course, when it comes to development of technology, automation, nowadays AI, people are feeling perhaps more insecure about their jobs. They might be feeling high pressure to skill up, to level up. So there is a lot of job insecurity in the workforce in general. Okay. So other than anxiety, on average, people are also reporting moderate range, which means basically an elevated levels of stress and depression as well. Okay. So what does this mean then in terms of productivity and the actual doing of work? Okay. So what we have found over time is that stress and anxiety correlate with lower intrinsic motivation, right? So when people are feeling helpless or they're feeling stuck, it is harder for them to push themselves to, be motivated or productive. Okay. Especially if they are not also then being compensated or rewarded accordingly. Okay. There is a higher task avoidance when people find it difficult to focus, when they're feeling very anxious about the kind of work that they do or the result. All right. So there is a need to avoid that discomfort. There is, of course, higher levels of conflict or perceived withdrawal, right? So sometimes managers may report dealing with employees who are dismissive, who go MIA, or who tend to be aggressive or passive aggressive. And this, if we dig a little deeper, may actually be due to high levels of stress and anxiety. Okay. And of course, when this happens and when they go unaddressed, and we don't provide enough support, right? When there isn't enough support in place, this then leads to more leave requests or absenteeism or, the need to take MC. Okay. So in Malaysia, when you know, this happens, right? When people continue to become unsupported in terms of their mental well-being, in 2018, Relate Malaysia did a white paper on this, and what they found was that the cost of mental health issues for total workforce in Malaysia is nearly 14.5 billion ringgit a year, right? And these are pre-COVID numbers, right? So I can only imagine what the numbers may actually look like now, okay? And a large chunk of that is due to lowered levels of productivity because of presenteeism. All right. So there's absenteeism, there is having to leave their job because of their mental well being. All right. And there's also presenteeism. So, where absenteeism is the need to take MC or days off because they're feeling unwell, those are usually seen as like short term, or you can calculate, the 1 or 2 days that the employee is not there, how much that costs, right? But presenteeism is a bit more discreet, right? It's hidden in the shadows where we don't realize that even though, yes, um, employees are attending work, their bodies are present there, they may be finding it difficult to focus, to deliver their targets because of health/mental health related difficulties um, that's going unaddressed. Okay, and in Malaysia, presenteeism is 3 times more costly. Okay, so it's higher in presenteeism is higher compared to absenteeism. And the statistics seem to be consistent throughout the years. Even AIA found that organizations lose a total of 73 days, okay, per employee per year due to absenteeism and presenteeism, right? And so I think it goes without saying that this costs companies as well as individuals and teams a lot, right? And not just monetarily, but I think also in terms of, their frustration, continued stressors and so on. So we then want to use this data to understand better about what we can do, where can prevention efforts, efforts to help employees, not just feel more healthy, but also feel more engaged, where can that come in? All right. So we're going to use this classic model of job demand resources to look at how mental health, when whether it is burnout or motivation, relates to productivity. All right. So that we can see here that burnout is a major mediator between job demand, right? So work stressors, workload, okay, and actual productivity. Okay. So the higher the burnout and the higher the job demand, then the lower the productivity because they are unable to complete work and they are distracted or unwilling to uh, engage in the task. Okay, so where do we want to target then? Is we want to focus on, yes, helping employees to feel more healthy, but also to look on the other side of that spectrum of mental health, where we want to think about motivation, engagement, thriving, right? And what we can do to increase that so that even if job demand is high, these things can help to sort of lessen that likelihood of them like totally not being able to be productive. Okay. Um, because of course, sometimes we can't change certain aspects of job demand, or those things will take time to change, right? But what programs can really do is to focus on these mediating parts, but then also focus on peer support, right? So if we expand the idea of health and well-being and productivity to look at it not just in terms of the individual, but also the system that they are at, the system that they're in, right? Then we think a bit more holistically and we can combine these three factors to help boost employee productivity and better outcomes. Okay. So, what does this then mean? All right. It means that not just about, you know, problem solving or reacting, it means we want to think even bigger in terms of building capacity, building resilience, making it a part of their set skills. Okay. And making this really a part of the company's culture, right? A strong part of their value is about well-being and health. Okay. And so we want to think about it as different levels. Okay. So starting from basic, which is really about education and awareness. Okay. When we talk about this level, then it's the basic understanding about mental health, um, about how to regulate stress, right? About how to tap into those aspects of positive psychology to help people to understand, to feel better. All right. And then we dive into a more hands on, when we look at the next level, more hands on things when it comes to skills, when it comes to time management, when it comes to communication or boundary setting. All right. And we want to remember that when we look at well being, it is not just about, like mental health alone. Mental health doesn't stand alone, right? Mental health um, stands in together with things like community, with things like fun and engagement and connection, right? And teamwork. So when we want to think about curating programs, we don't just want to focus on, okay, how do I help my employees to be like less stressed or less anxious? But we also want to think about how can we help them to feel more healthy, more engaged, more connected? How do we help them to communicate better? Right. So we really want to expand this sense of wellness in that way. All right. And that also means to push for motivation, right? By thinking about what can we do as a team, right? Um, Beyond just wellness programs, but also how can we make certain things a habit by using what we already have, like technology, right? How can we make technology part of the program as a means to help employees feel more encouraged, feel more motivated, right? To give them that recognition or, tiny rewards. And if you've been a part of Engaged Life, you know that gamification of wellness is something that we are into, right? And it is these small rewards that kind of keep people going. Okay. And it doesn't have to be like monetary. It can just be simple things like I post a picture of me, doing my meditation or morning yoga or morning run. And, my other teammates support this or give me, clap for me. And that's a sense of recognition that's enough to drive that motivation. All right. So when we think about these, we then want to make sure that these curated programs are personalized to you, your company, your team, and the individuals in them. All right. Because this strengthens the effectiveness, right? And there is a sense of, you know, it being applicable to people. And then they're more likely to take ownership of it because they feel like, yes, this relates to me. This is personal to me. I want to do this. And so, what we have at Engaged Life is this My Wellness assessment, right? Where we divide you into different personas in terms of how you're looking at health and what applies to you, right? So you could be the tired survivor, priority juggler, wellness activist, and the programs that are suitable for you will depend on these things. All right. So for example, a tired survivor whose, focus is just about putting food on the table, making sure my kids have something to eat, making sure I just have a job, right? And making sure the bills are paid on time, they're not going to be engaged so much in something like, pickleball, uh, activity, or, a 2-day workshop on communication, right? Helping them engage with health needs to be something small, uh, short term, something that they feel like is accessible to them, right? They may feel like I don't have 2 days to kill to, talk about communication, or I don't have time, for example, to, have fun and play pickleball. Like I'm genuinely worried about putting food on the table here, right? So if we want to curate wellness programs for them, they need to be in smaller bits, right? So something like this, like a 30-minute webinar or short assessments that they can do on an app or on a link, right? Something small that they can see small improvements, right? Whereas a wellness activist, somebody who is very familiar about health or mental health, may want something or benefit from something that's a bit more niche. So these may be very specific topics like emotional intelligence, or maybe specific topics like biohacking, for example. Okay. So the way to curate programs that are more effective is when they are personalized and meaningful for them. Okay. So I promise you, after this, you will get a chance to see which persona you personally are. All right. So for us to advocate for wellness, we also kind of want to be able to engage in that as well. All right. So for all of you here today, you will get a QR code later for you to scan, okay, to see which persona are you and to know what kind of program would suit you best. All right. So those are some things that we want to think about when we think about curating programs. Now, as I've said, if we really want to push for employee wellness, it needs to be more than just one-off programs. It needs to be more than just like reacting to a problem that is in the here and now and then we don't touch it again or we don't follow up, right? But rather, if we really want to advocate for wellness, if we really want to make a change, if we really want to do something that's sustainable, we really need to think about what are we modeling, what are we preaching in our workplace in terms of our values and culture, right? So each company has their core values, right? And of course, my invitation is for you to think about employee health as a core value, right? And health or mental health doesn't have to mean necessarily things like fitness, right? But it can expand to other things like empowerment, feeling balanced, um, respect, soundness, self care, feeling nourished, right? A healthy workplace is also one that has a sense of community and connection, right? So as you're looking at these words, I hope you're also thinking about what you feel resonates or is relevant for you, not just as a company, but also as a person, right? Um, Now, company values what we say we care about, and company culture can be two different things, all right? How? So, values are what we say we care about, right? It may be a tagline, right? Um, something like so and so company where people are one and balanced and healthy or something. Okay. But culture is really about what we do with our hands and feet, right? It is in our day to day behaviors, habits, and practices. And sometimes they don't align. So, for example, a company can say that here at XYZ company, we value work life balance. But in the day to day practice, it is, 10 p.m., you get a message to say, that says, oh, can you come in for a 30-minute meeting, right? Um, you get, the message that leaving anytime before 7 p.m. is unacceptable. You get glances when you leave work on time, right? So that then in the long term creates a culture. And when what we say and what we do are not aligned, those are the biggest drivers of burnout, cynicism, or like lack of belief in the company, which then results in low engagement, quiet quitting, meaning I'm there, but I'll just do the bare minimum to make sure I get my pay, right? And psychological insecurity, which is the opposite of psychological safety. So, a sense of what's the point of saying anything when I know or I can see or your behavior tells me that you don't really care. All right. So we want to be mindful that what we say and what we practice are actually aligned, right? So, what are some behaviors when we think about mental health? What are behaviors that actually support mental health? So, this, of course, starts with, I think, transparency and psychological safety, where there is an openness in terms of communication. And it's not just communicating the good stuff, but also communicating not so happy things when things are high pressure, right? When things are difficult, right? To be able to have that healthy and open communication during those times as well. It is about normalizing boundaries by setting specific cutoff times as policy and practice. It is about having empathetic conversations that is beyond just KPI or performances, but really showing interest in the individuals, which also means then adequate amount of recognition and appreciation. And what is, on the other hand, barriers to this kind of healthy culture is the expectation to always be on. And this is a challenge, especially when we have a lot of tech, right? When people are supposedly accessible, whether through WhatsApp, Teams, emails, right? Email notifications, we feel like, oh, there's no reason for you to not reply to me uh, because you have all of this technology now. But just because they're there, it doesn't mean that we need to always utilize them, right? But what's happening is that working hours go beyond 9 to 5 because of accessibility. Okay. And when we are rewarding that accessibility, it doesn't have to be obvious things like you promote the one who's always going above and beyond, but it can be simple things like, always praising them for like, oh, I can always rely on you for last minute things. You're so hardworking and so great, right? But instead, we also want to reward or recognize healthy behaviors, like, okay, I noticed that you put your well-being first, or, that you really prioritize going for exercise at 5:30. And that's great. I see you so much more lively, so much more focused, so much more healthy when you practice this, right? So it is sometimes these little things that we don't notice that we are encouraging. Okay. Um, and of course, part of that is also then stigma around help seeking, right? We might say that, okay, here's a list of panel clinics or psychologists that you can see, or here's a, stress management or emotion regulation talk that you can go for. If you need to contact a psychologist, please go ahead and do so. But then in actual practice, there can be a lot of questioning, a lot of judgment, a lot of little things that people say when it comes to mental health. So it can be things like, yeah, everybody has anxiety. Actually, no, not everybody has an anxiety disorder. Okay. And of course, when management or higher management um, are not able to support these wellness initiatives in terms of their own practices, then that creates a big barrier. Okay. So, what Deloitte is looking at is how to boost or sustain these wellness efforts from approaching it top down. Okay. And it's been our experience, or at least my experience as well, when, I run programs or workshops or any kind of initiative, it always feels like at some point there is a stalemate, because whatever that we are trying to do um, in practice at the employee or executive level becomes clashing with what is expected of them from their higher ups, right? So over here, we talk about, yes, take care of yourself, work-life balance, set boundaries, communicate. But if up here, we're not telling them the same message, we're not giving them the same impression, we're not encouraging or supporting these efforts, then people feel stuck. Okay, because oftentimes what happens um, and it's shown in this graph here, is that higher management always perceive their employees or executives as being, much more healthy or more well than they actually are, right? So they tend to overestimate how well their employees are doing, but the actual fact is I'm not actually as happy or doing as okay or able to as be as productive as you think I am, right? And when there is a lack of psychological safety, then they're not able to express those things. All right. So this is where we want to make sure that whatever programs that we create, whatever wellness initiatives that we do, that the upper management are always um, in tune and a part of those programs as well. Right. And so, yes, it may feel for some that, okay, that's just like more stuff on their plate, more things for them to think about. But what they have found is that these things help people to feel like they're doing better in terms of leadership skills, feeling more connected to their team and more connected to a larger sense of purpose, and has made their job more rewarding because, we can hypothesize that then the conflict or tension between these will reduce, right? And that creates a healthier, better environment for everyone, right? And so, whilst earlier I shared that, the stats about the cost of unmanaged mental health difficulties, what World Health Organization has followed up with is that for every $1 that companies spend on their employees' wellness, the return of investment is 4 times that, right? So this tells us that when we run these kind of programs, when we intervene, when we show support to our employees, it is actually worth it. It does work. It does help them to feel healthier, better, more able to be productive and to grow. All right. So, if we zoom out, then I would really like for us to think of, whatever programs or efforts around wellness as something that works as a system, right? A mental health issue is not an individual, one person's issue, but it is something that is systemic, that the environment also plays a role, and that each one of us can play a role in, helping ourselves feel better, but also helping the people around us feel better. And when we are um, people leaders, when our work is to help people, then our responsibility for that is, I guess, even bigger, right? So I hope that at the end of this, you're also then thinking about what you're doing for yourself personally to help yourself feel better, right? And what are some little things that you're doing to help the people around you to feel healthier, feel more engaged, and feel more productive. All right. So, as promised, I will show you the QR code, right, for you to also then kind of see which persona you are at and what program might actually work best for you. Okay, so I will pass the floor over to Amira for that. And I'll be happy to take any questions that you have, right? So just drop them in on the chat. I am excited to hear more about what are your thoughts, your opinions, your questions on this. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Amira.